Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Allison Muscolino. I'm an educator in innovation and creativity at the Art Institute of Chicago and part of the Department of Learning and Public Engagement. It's a pleasure to welcome you today to our panel conversation, Art and Climate Crisis. And this program is going to explore the intersections between artistic practice and environmental activism. Today, we're celebrating Earth Day with this program, which is part of a series of programs. And my colleague Cameron is going to drop a link in the chat for you in case you'd like to see additional programs that we have planned as part of this series. We have upcoming performance and art making programs, as well as some videos and additional resources for you to check out. To start with a little bit of housekeeping and to orient everyone, today's program should run approximately an hour and a half. We are recording it and we'll have that available on our Art Institute YouTube channel. And this channel is a great place to check out any programs that you might have missed or anything that you want to refresh or catch again. And today we're going to be using presentation mode. So that means that attendee videos and microphones have been turned off. For optimal viewing, we suggest that you select full screen mode under the view options, which is in the top right corner of your screen. We're also encouraging you and hoping that you'll use the chat throughout the presentations to share your questions or comments. The chat is often a really robust conversation that complements the presentations. So please do feel free to use that throughout. We also have closed captions available today, and those can be turned on using the controls at the bottom of your screen. All right, to set the stage for today's conversation, which, as I mentioned, explores the intersections between artistic practice and then environmental activism, we can look at a few examples from our museum collection. We start with a photograph by the 20th century photographer Ansel Adams, who's regarded by many as an early embodiment of this environmentalist artist. Right? His majestic photographs, like we see here, for example, depicting Mirror Lake, have been and continue to often be used to promote environmental causes. They present a pristine, untouched view of nature and the landscape, and certainly something to be preserved, but they're also completely nostalgic and in many ways mythic, right? They raise questions for us like, where are the people, industry, and what's the relationship that humans and nature experience? Kind of where are the impacts of humans on these spaces? If we turn to some examples from our contemporary collection, we see work that takes a more critical view of these issues. In the work of photographer David Bertinsky, for example, on the left side of your screen, we find a dedication to bearing witness very critically to the impact of humans on the planet. In his photographs, for example, Dryland Farming, which you see here, he explores this collective impact that we as a species are having on the surface of the planet. Right? It's an inspection of these systems, these human systems that we continue to impose onto the natural landscape. We can also look at the work of sculptor Liz Larner, and this piece, Wreath, is a new addition to the museum collection as of 2020, and it's currently on view in the museum in Gallery 289 in the Modern Wing. So if you happen to visit the museum, I hope that you'll take a chance to view it in person. This is a ceramic sculpture in which the artist has mixed forage materials such as natural rocks and minerals into her clay formation before subjecting it to the firing and glazing process. And she hasn't smoothed away the surfaces. Instead, she's left it full of craggy contours that reflect the environment from which these materials have come. So within its physical composition, it serves as a platform for environmental address, right? She brings to mind and gives material form to issues of climate change, ecological collapse, and endangered landforms by referencing the disappearing coral reefs that kind of loosely informed this particular work. right? So she's giving us a piece that embodies this precarious, this dangerous relationship between humans and the natural environment. And building on these examples, we can now turn to today's panelists, who I'm thrilled to introduce. They each invite us so generously into their work and expand the conversation by moving beyond critical commentary into tangible action, which they're going to illustrate for us today. So to begin, we're going to welcome Gabriella Salazar, who's a New York-based artist who creates sculptures, drawings, and site-responsive interventions. Reflecting on her practice, Salazar says that ultimately the work reframes how we are affected by the changes in what we create. I use found materials and sites, engaging in wordplay, psychogeography, and phenomenology to bring out new associations between the found, the altered, and the made. We also welcome Jenny Kendler, who's an interdisciplinary artist, environmental activist, naturalist, and wild forager who lives in Chicago and various forests. Since 2014, she's been the first artist in residence with the National Resources Defense Council. Carrie Hansen joins us. She's a choreographer, dance educator, and founding artistic director of the Seldums. And her work involves the research and embodiment of social, political, environmental issues, and history as a mode of creating performances that speak to these larger subjects. Laura Lupton is a creative projects consultant based in New York City and the co-founder of Artists Commit, an artist-led collective committed to a climate-conscious, resilient, and equitable future. Artists Commit provides resources for and solidarity with other creatives working toward these shared goals. And finally, today's program will be moderated by Dr. Mika Tosca. And she's a climate scientist, humanist, and activist, also assistant professor at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and an affiliate climate researcher at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Southern California. Her research and public outreach explores the synthesis of art and climate science and posits that engaging with artists, designers, and makers is instrumental to solving the climate crisis. So it's a pleasure now to introduce Mika, who's going to welcome all of our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for joining us here today. This is really exciting. I'll be brief because we're going to hear from some truly fantastic artists and activists working sort of at this intersection of art and climate. But I wanted to start with just a brief overview of my own practice as a climate scientist who teaches full-time at the School of the Art Institute right here across the street from the museum. And so I wanted to just briefly share my screen. I've got a very small, short, I promise, presentation. I want to start with this quote by Octavia Butler from her novel Parable of the Sower, which recently made the New York Times bestseller list last year for the first time. Far too late, far overdue. Afrofuturists like Octavia Butler, N.K. Jemisin, etc., really inspire my work because they're able to sort of capture the imagination of the public about these scientific sort of questions and issues in building future worlds, but using science fiction, sort of an art practice to get there. And this quote really inspires me. I read it daily, especially during this pandemic. The world is full of painful stories. Sometimes it seems as though there aren't any other kind, and yet I found myself thinking how beautiful that glint of water was through the trees. I do, in fact, think there is, obviously, that's why I'm here, a really important role for aesthetics and art and design to play in not just the communication of climate change and the climate crisis, but also in the construction and the production of scientific knowledge. And so this excerpt from an essay by David George Haskell called Notes on Ecological Aesthetics and Ethics also inspires me, and I'll just read it out loud. Once we collectively have an integrated sense of aesthetics, we can begin to discern what is beautiful and broken about a place. And from there, I believe we can begin to form an objective or near objective foundation for ethical discernment. Answers emerge from the community of life itself, filtered through human experience and consciousness. I argue with my students that we seem to have, as a human species, separated ourselves from nature despite being a really integral part of nature. And I argue that we have to reimagine our future along the lines of the the type of reimagining that folks like Octavia Butler and N.K. Jemisin, et cetera, do, as one where humanity and nature can coexist, where we are a part of nature. And if we can redefine the boundaries between the natural and the unnatural, then I think that we can create a path forward to solving the climate crisis. One of the reasons why I do think it's so important for artists and designers to participate in this effort is because scientists are generally not viewed as good communicators. In a recent poll of Americans, 89% of respondents viewed Americans as scientists as intelligent, but only 54% of us, 4% of them viewed us as good communicators. Clearly, see, I'm poor communicating, and 43% of us viewed us as being socially awkward. So there absolutely is a role here to capture sort of the imagination of the general public. I also draw on the work of Timothy Morin, a philosopher who has written a fantastic book called Hyperobjects. And in this book, he describes climate change as an abstracted object, a hyperobject, if you will, one that is too temporally and spatially large for our brains to really wrap themselves around. And while we all encounter abstractions in our work, artists, designers, scientists, artists and designers in particularly intelligently address abstraction and create objects every day. And so with my students, I work on ways that we can sort of talk about and represent the climate crisis through aesthetic representations. And these are just two examples: a Snapchat story one of my students made for their final project on the left, and a video and performance that another one of my students made on the right. But more importantly than just the communication of the climate crisis is that I do believe that the artistic and design process in particular can influence the scientific method. So here I've compared on the top the design process and on the bottom the scientific method. And the main difference between these two is that the design process and the artistic making process often involves this understanding step that precedes any ideation, prototyping, and refinement. And in this understanding phase, there's empathizing and learning and listening. And I argue that this is something that scientists could do to perhaps more effectively involve artists and designers in the scientific process and ultimately result in the production of, let's use the subjective word, better scientific knowledge. And so I'll end my little piece here with just arguing that this isn't necessarily the end of the world. It's just the end of this current world, this sort of world that we've constructed that's precipitated the climate crisis. But we have a radical and revolutionary opportunity to make the next world better and brighter and more equitable. But if we don't first imagine the future that we want, we'll never have the future that we deserve. We must incorporate diverse voices, which includes artists and queer folks like myself, to get us to the next world. And so with that, I would like to welcome our first presenter, who is Gabriella Salazar, and Allison has already done a fantastic introduction, so I will just let Gabriella take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Mika. And thank you so much to the Art Institute for inviting us into this conversation. I'm really honored to be here with Jenny and Carrie and Laura, and excited to share some of my work with all of you. And I'm going to be reading, just be sure I don't miss anything. So excuse my eyes moving this way. Next slide. I use my work as a tool to examine the built environment and material, how we create a sense of self and society from the places we construct and inhabit, and how we construct it, what we will do for our human need for shelter and the meaning we derive from that shelter. I'm fascinated by the possibilities available in that back and forth, that symbiotic relationship. For example, some of my recent work that I'm not showing here uses the form of a handrail as a place where we literally rely on architecture to support us, to lead us or guide us. And the assumptions that we bring to that form are part of what I'm playing with in the work. And I came to connect my work in climate action through that lens of the human built environment. It was not really until I was invited by Storm King Art Center in New York in 2017 to participate in a show called Indicators, Artists on Climate Change, where I met Jenny Kendler as well, that I was able to make that connection to climate, which of course there is, between what we as humans make to take care of ourselves on this planet. So this is Matters in Shelter and Place. When Storm King invited me, this was not long after Hurricanes Maria and Irma had devastated Puerto Rico, where my family is from. And I was it was very much on my mind, and I was really trying to think of how to bring that emotional pain of that experience of being remote from this devastation to the work. Next, please. And next. So from experience, I already knew how much of the architecture in Puerto Rico was built in concrete, but through more research, I found that part of why that is that concrete is one of the few building materials that can withstand hurricanes, and that will withstand the increasingly strong winds and flooding that will come from climate intensified weather. This was also apparent in the pictures. I saw the devastation where the foundation or the concrete poured platform of a house would be left standing, but the walls and roof would be blown away. Next. I also discovered that concrete is the second most used material on Earth after water, and that it is also one of the major contributors to CO2 production. The making of concrete and steel now account for about 15% of worldwide CO2 production. So it's incredibly important that we, along with all the other climate action we take, deeply consider how and why we build, and to reuse and repurpose what we already have. As it reflects in shelter, concrete is a material that creates its own necessity. One of the only materials that can be used to keep people safe in a climate intensified world is contributing to its own increased need, sort of trapping us in its use. Next. Next. In the images from Puerto Rico, I was also, of course, struck by the blue tarps that were going up as makeshift roofs and walls. Next. And imagined what it must feel like to live under one, your light always bathed in blue underwater. In designing the structure, I was also thinking of a description by my mother of a memory she had of a semillero, a sort of greenhouse that is built to protect young coffee seedlings from sun as they grow. Coffee is actually a shade plant. And so farmers put the seedlings under this protective tarp, sort of tented. About 80% of the coffee crop in Puerto Rico was destroyed by Maria right before harvest time. So this the coffee industry had been a sort of emerging bright spot in Puerto Rico's landscape. It was kind of a re-emerging agribusiness, and it was pretty devastated. I also wanted the site, you can go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, no, maybe go back a few. I missed one in there. Yeah, that's good. I also wanted the site, the approach to the work to feel a little like finding a ruined temple in a field, one with like a high portico, which you'll see, I think, in the next couple slides. For an earlier project called My Lands or Islands, I had developed this coffee clay that for me specifically connected my family's history with coffee farming on the island to American interests and influence on the economy and agronomy there, to the migration of Puerto Ricanos to New York City and urban renewal projects here in New York in the 1950s and 60s, to the individual body, to consumption and habit, to desire and need, and back to larger destructive capitalist geopolitics. As a material, it operates to bridge the micro to macro, the organic to the constructed, the found to the made, the distance between one island and another. Next. The clay is like a Play-Doh made of salvaged used coffee grounds, flour, and salt. So all the grounds I use in these pieces are grounds that have been already, provided coffee for somebody to drink and have had a part of themselves pass through a body and are waste. As these wedge forms were made, the outside would dry before the inside, creating an inherent instability. The pieces then, as the inside started to dry, would slowly crack and explode and crumble over the course of the show. In Matters and Shelter, the coffee clay was molded to mimic the forms of the concrete blocks. That same clay, now exposed to the elements, fell apart and interacted with the environment, becoming a substrate for growth and decay. I replaced and added bricks to the structure throughout the 5 months that it was up. This is an image from the part of the process of reclaiming the collected grounds, which would have to be sifted and dried so they didn't mold before I could measure and then mix them again. And then this is a series of images of the work some months after it was up. There's a very different aspect to the space on a rainy day. The tarp disperses water, making a kind of misting inside. There was also a very distinctive smell, which was not coffee, not rot, very, very particular kind of smell. Replacing and replenishing the blocks over the course of the show for me was a means to participate in and acknowledge the Sisyphean experience of rebuilding with what you know will not save you, with what will in fact bring you closer to the next big hurricane, the next climate emergency. Next. And I'll end by sharing a piece that I'm doing on October 10th this year. This was postponed from just exactly a year ago because of the pandemic, commissioned by the Climate Museum, which is an amazing organization dedicated to using the energy and communitarian aspects of art and creativity to inspire action and advance solutions on the climate crisis. And I'll put later a link in the chat to a video that the Climate Museum made with director Mika Fink about this project. This will be a one-day performative work taking place in Washington Square Park. It's called Low Relief for High Water. Here's an image of the site, so you can visualize it a little better. It's called Garibaldi Plaza. It's often used by musicians when the weather is nice, so it's a sort of natural gathering place. And the forms in the sculpture are direct casts of the windows of the apartment I grew up in New York City, which is also the apartment I currently live in. We moved in maybe 3 weeks after my daughter was born. She's now a little over 2 years old. My parents are also architects, and then they renovated this apartment back in 1983, keeping most of the original windows and doors. And clearly, you know, my work, I've been influenced by the experience of living in and growing up in this space that I understood to be shaped by my own family. Low relief is made of a water-soluble paper, which I found on the internet, no shame in that, that I discovered can be moistened and molded over things to make casts. We used methyl cellulose in the making of the work, which is a plant-based glue to construct it from torn pieces. And this is the building that I live in, which dates from around 1918. So you can see my windows there with the paper over them. Broadly, I understand the cast of these 100-year-old windows is a metaphor for a shared vulnerability New York has to rising waters, as a means to bring attention to the risks rising sea levels pose to many people's homes and livelihoods all over the world. And of course, these themes have taken on some new complexities throughout the pandemic and in the context of lockdowns and orders to stay home to stay safe, which has not been an option for everyone, nor is a home always a comfort or even safe. The idea for the work actually sprang from a sort of lonely despair and helplessness about the climate crisis that descended on me after I became a mother. When the Climate Museum approached me to create something, my daughter was just 6 months old, and I was wondering about how to make vulnerability participatory, thinking that maybe through literally sharing my fears and sharing what I held dear, that there was an opportunity to grow some solidarity and community, to invite more people to the conversation that I was having in my head. Through developing this work, I've come to really appreciate the possibility that art creates for people to get emotional and hopeful about what fighting for the climate can accomplish, what it can look like, in a way that facts alone cannot. And trying to think about what that might actually look like, I was wondering how to subject what brings me safety, shelter, and stability up to the whims of a known and unknown public. In a way that I think, you know, thinking about climate action, we really are depending on a lot of strangers, a lot of people out in the world that we all need to be on board and pushing for change. And so through that offering of that personal thing, creating space for a kind of communion with others and hopefully a joy in seeing that we are not alone in this work to save where we live, that there are many ways to be a part of it. The cast will be assembled into a structure that over the course of the day, I will tear apart into various sized pieces, stamped with an embossing of the title and date of the work, and offer to viewers to do with what they like. So it is their choice to care for it, neglect it, write or draw on it, pass it on, actively destroy it. But whatever they do, that exchange is a symbol. It's a fragment of the responsibility we all share for both climate change and climate action. So I really hope to see some of you there in person. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was really fantastic and also right on time. I invite the other panelists, if you've got comments or questions, we have maybe a couple minutes for engagement with Gabriella, Jenny, or Carrie, or someone in the comments is asking if there are dates for the work.
October 10th.
October 10th. Okay.
Yes, unless something happens, but that's the date for now. And it's going to be all day, so I'm assuming we won't have hours yet, but it'll be early until probably the sun goes down. I also plan after the piece is dispersed as much as it can be to actually destroy the remaining material if anything's staying past that time.
That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
that's just, your work is incredibly generous. And I think this idea of empathy is what really was coming through for me. The idea of that connection and kind of moving beyond facts that for whatever reason just might not resonate in the same way as that personal connection. And so I just really appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that your focus also on place is really interesting. It has kind of got me thinking through the whole presentation about how my own association with place changed during this pandemic, because I spent time in the exact same place for like 13 months in a row, and how a lot of people have experienced that and have been sort of improving their homes. Like you go to IKEA and like it's sold out because everyone's kind of trying to improve their space. And I wonder if what your thoughts are on like whether that we can translate that to of our place, like as a planetary, like, you know, planetary inhabitants.
No, absolutely. I mean, I hope that this time that all of us have been kind of forced to, yeah, really sit still, even with the wanderlust that's now kind of crowding, I think, many of our minds, have like hopefully have a little bit of a renewed appreciation for like the local, you know, to actually kind of like make connection, reconnect with what's here. And I, you know, this being in the apartment that I grew up in, I think a lot has changed in the neighborhood, as things do in New York. There, it's always shifting to the next thing, the next thing. But it has given me a new appreciation for what's here now, and like making connections with my neighbors, and the community that's here.
Absolutely, yeah. We're gonna move to our next panelist, who is hang on, I have to pull up my list. Jenny Kendler, sorry. So go for it.
Hi. I wanted to just again thank the museum for taking the time to really spotlight concerns around the climate crisis. I think that this is it's an incredibly important responsibility for those of us who are engaged in essentially being the creators of culture, and the museum, you know, holds a lot of power and influence in this regard. And so it's deeply heartening to me to see them bringing focus not just to Earth Day, but Earth Week, Earth Month, all the time. And I'm pleased to be in such great company here. It's nice to reconnect with Gabriela, who, you know, we were in the Storm King exhibition, Indicators, Artists on Climate Change together. Yeah, I feel like we can start the presentation. So I'm going to try to fly through about 7 years of my work. We don't have much time to present, and so I'll also be really happy to answer questions at the end. I'll do a lot of describing of the work, and then we can maybe talk about some of what it means or the more complicated elements of it later on. So this is a project that I first created while I was artist in residence with the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is still a position that I hold. And so in my work as a visual artist, I'm engaging not just with traditional art making and making work for galleries and museums, but I also work a lot in public spaces, and especially tend to do work in collaboration with non-governmental organizations, not-for-profits like NRDC. I was recently invited onto the board at 350.org, and so I'll be trying to extend my skill set to do, culture change and communication and fundraising for this major organization working to mitigate climate change globally. So Natural Resources Defense Council, we did this project together for the Pulitzer Arts Foundation. You can go to the next slide, please. That took the form of a food cart for monarch butterflies. And what we did with the project was give away, actually of the lifespan of the project, which popped up at many different museums and public locations and even grade schools and things around the country. We gave away thousands of biodegradable balloons filled with milkweed seed. This was directly in response to the crisis that we learned about facing monarch butterflies, where their populations have plummeted about 90%. Now, this is largely due to the use of glyphosate, which is a chemical known as Roundup, sprayed onto GMO crops it's made by Monsanto, but also there is actually a real climate aspect to this, as well as climate shift, not just in the Midwest, where it's sort of the breadbasket of the monarch, but in Michoacan as well, where they overwinter. So we really wanted to get people involved in this issue, as thinking about not only how can they have an art experience in this and sort of turn that experience inside out as a public project, but make people feel like they're really involved and engaged in this and emotionally engaged. Next slide, please. This was a project that was in collaboration with 5 or 6 different cultural organizations throughout the city of Chicago and based out of Gallery 400 at UIC. We received an Andrew Mellon grant that was specifically for work in humanities around climate change. And this was a multi-year endeavor, but that centered around a public art piece, which was a mobile garden that demonstrated the quote speed of climate change. In this case, meaning the speed at which plants would need to move to keep up with the warming climate. So presumptively, if plants could pick themselves up and walk, they would need to be moving at, roughly it's like 4.7 kilometers annually to keep ahead of the warming climate. And of course, we know that they can't do that. But we wanted to really bring some tangible visualization to Chicago communities to help them understand how quickly things were shifting. And I think that this, you can go to the next slide, please. This touches on some elements that are important in my work, which is working collaboratively, working site-specifically, engaging with communities, and also this idea of how art, especially around issues of climate, Mika brought up Timothy Morton's idea of the hyper object. The hyper object is diffuse, it's invisible, it's distributed. And that I think has been one of the communication challenges around climate change, is that we feel like it is elsewhere or that it happens to other people. And I think, of course, recently it's really, we've started to understand in our own physical way that actually, no, it's here and it's now. But, art does play an important role in helping to visualize things that we couldn't otherwise visualize. Next slide, please. This is a project that really is bridging my work between art and activism. This was created in collaboration with a poet and a frontline activist named Mara Eve Robbins, who works in Virginia, which is my home state, around the stopping of the MVP pipeline and the ACP pipeline. I will tell you that excitingly during the pandemic, the ACP pipeline was canceled. And that is partly because of work that people like this amazing, beautiful, brave to just nickel and dime these companies until they eventually had to say it's too expensive and give up. The Mountain Valley Pipeline, or MVP pipeline, is it's foolish, it's unnecessary, it's far bigger than anything that's ever run through the space. It's cutting right through the Jefferson National Forest, and sadly, thousands and thousands of trees have already been cut to put this unneeded fracked gas pipeline through the space. But do believe that, you'll see here I wrote the project runs from 2018 until we win. I do believe that we will stop this pipeline. And my project was just a small effort to not only create something that could be used as a tool essentially by activists. So it's basically a open source idea, the idea of these free floating, fluttering blue banners that represent clean water. And it's been used in countless ways, literally to string across roads and block bulldozers. There have been water blessings. Next slide, please. And they've been taken to DEQ hearings. And then in this case, they were actually in the Museum of Contemporary Art. So you can see how I'm interested in kind of stepping across this line in a show called Water After All. And here you see kind of the art version of it, which are these beautiful indigo dyed flags that used a shibori technique and were dyed with river water, hung alongside the darker blue ones, which have been inscribed by community members with every single named water body that the pipelines would presumptively cross and potentially pollute or destroy. And that's where the name of the project, 1,000 Flags, 1,000 Waters, comes from. Next slide, please. This is the project that was in the show with Gabriela at Storm King, and is a piece called Birds Watching. What you're looking at is a 40-foot sculpture of reflective photographic prints mounted on aluminum, and each one of them depicts the eye of a bird species that is threatened by climate change. And so this data came from a report by the Audubon Foundation that showed that 316 birds, American species of birds, will be potentially either driven from our country or become extinct because of climate change. Next slide. And so what I'm interested in here is really thinking about how there's this mutualism with the more than human world, that when we look at the natural world, that nature looks back. My work is really concerned with unseating this idea of human exceptionalism and recognizing that, you know, we are not above the natural world, but more honestly, we ourselves are animals, and we are embedded within and deeply dependent on these natural systems. And I wanted to think about the, you know, in art history, there's this idea of the gaze, of course, which has been so problematic, has usually been the white male gaze looking on in an ownership sort of sense, just about everyone else. And so I really wanted to reverse that and think about what it was like to have the natural world return the gaze. Thanks, let's go to the next slide. This is where the piece is now in Chicago. Next slide, please. I think I'm running long, so let's fly through these just a little bit. Will you just skip to the next project, please? Thank you. Okay, and I just will talk about a little bit about my actual work doing direct action before I close. So this is, these are all projects from 2019. This is a banner that I painted with my friend Ryan and a great many people that showed up for a project in 2019 where we were blocking the street down in front of City Hall in Chicago. We were demanding that the city of Chicago declare a climate emergency. And again, I will say that they did. It took a while, and you know, that we have to give some teeth to that and make it meaningful. But next slide, please. Let's go a couple more. And then this is some members of our group getting arrested in the lobby of BlackRock, which again, I think I've chosen these slides because I think that this shows that what we're doing as culture makers is working. This is in the lobby of BlackRock. And again, BlackRock is one of the largest investment firms in the world, and they actually have declared that working around climate change and trying to become climate neutral is incredibly important. Again, we need to hold them to account with this, but I think that that's part of you know, what we're all interested in doing here today. So thank you so much for listening. And I think I put too many slides in my presentation. So we'll turn it back over to the group, and then I'm happy to answer questions as we go along.
Thank you so much, Jenny. That was really great. So many cool projects. There's a question in the chat about where that bird eye gaze project is actually installed in Chicago.
Yes, it's actually, yeah, it's still up. It's a permanent piece up on the 606. So that's the elevated trail that runs through West Town. And it's like, I believe, between Kimball and St. Louis.
Yeah, I've seen it and I was like, this is cool. And so now it's cool to meet the person who actually made it. It's very cool.
Cool to meet you too. I know we have a lot of friends in common. I really admire your work.
Thanks. Thank you. There's another question here from Amanda Thomas, who said, how would you recommend getting involved in Chicago? I'm assuming with like Extinction Rebellion and direct action and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that we're always looking for other folks to organize with us. If you want to reach out to me directly through my website, I'd be happy to network you in with those folks, but you can also go to the Extinction Rebellion Chicago Instagram or our website. And then, there are many groups doing really exciting work here. El Vejo and Pero especially are doing really important work around trying to stop development on the south side of the city. And we're right now, honestly, because of the pandemic, we've gone into sort of a support mode. We haven't been doing a lot of direct action, but we're really trying to uplift the work of people doing environmental justice work in the city. And so we absolutely need other folks to be involved, and I'd be happy to be a gateway to get you involved. Thanks for asking.
Thank you so much for that. And I think we'll move on to the next presenter, unless one of the panelists has a pressing question for Jenny. No, okay. So our next, I keep losing the sheet with the people's names on it. Our next presenter is Carrie Hanson, and I won't say anything more. Carrie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Carrie Hanson. I'm a choreographer and the artistic director of a dance company called The Seldums. I'm really happy to be here and to learn about all of these artists' tremendous work. It's such good company. And also thanks to Michael Green and the Art Institute for inviting me to join the conversation. I am too going to be reading, so I'm going to be, my eyes are going to be going back and forth. I just wanted to cover a lot of content. Today, I'm going to be talking about and sharing excerpts of the Seldums work Flow. It's a multimedia performance work about disappearing ice, extreme weather events, rising sea levels, flooded cities, and a persistent strain of climate denialism and anti-science sentiment. And Matt, you can go to the next slide. Flow premiered in January 2020 at Wisconsin Union Theater at UW-Madison with participation from the Nelson Institute for the Environment, which is named for Senator Gaylord Nelson, who helped to both imagine and establish the first Earth Day 51 years ago. Flow fits into the Seldums body of dance theater work that speak to issues at the intersection of environmental and social justice. Our process is very collaborative, involving large teams of artists. For Flow, in addition to building with my ensemble of 5 wonderful dancers, we also worked with playwright Seth Boakley, visual artist Bob Faust, sound designer Mikhail Fixel, and several other designers in costume and lighting and projection. We also had scientific and research advisors, including Ken Dunton, a marine biologist from UT Austin who has been researching in the Arctic at the Beaufort Sea Lagoon for some 30 years, and is very involved with the Inupiat community there. One of Ken's stories became part of Flow's audio design. Ken would often talk about how scientists need help telling their stories, to go back to Mika's point. The story that became part of the audio design is a rather tragic one about an Inupiat family who went out fishing in their small boat, but because of the changing sea ice and higher waves, 2 family members ended up drowning. It's a difficult story and one that reveals how quickly the Arctic region is changing. Matt, if you could go forward to the next slides. Yeah, thank you. In building Flow, we were thinking about 2 regions, both the Gulf Coast and particularly Houston, and also the Arctic, which is changing more rapidly than any other place on the planet. These incredible images of Arctic ice were contributed to the project by Ocean Geographic, which took a group of 60+ photographers, conservationists, and scientists to the Arctic in 2015. Photographers are working very quickly to record these places before they disappear. Matt, if you could go on to the next few slides. In choreographing Flow, we also referenced painter Gerhard Richter's series of 4 paintings entitled Ice, which are part of the Art Institute's collection. I really love how much his Ice #1 resembles the last photograph shown of an actual ice shelf. The spectacle of a vast icy landscape undergoing change, such as melt and glacial calving, was the imagery that cued our physical vocabulary for Flow. Actions such as collapse, fracture, heave, and diminish are seen throughout the choreography that tries to convey disappearance and absence. To us, these actions are also on view in Richter's paintings. His very process of creating them by scraping away many accumulated layers of paint relates to a choreographic tactic from the Seldums Toolbox project that we call scraping. This movement expresses friction and pressure and leaves the body changed and concave. Richter's ice paintings draw our attention to depth, surfaces, and light, just as the melting Arctic landscape draws attention to those layers of ice that had accumulated for millions of years and its reflective surface that stabilizes and preserves a livable climate. Another input for Flow came from a literary source, Melville's Moby Dick, which references a kind of voyage of madness, conquest, and man's adversarial relationship to nature. One scene features a monologue about the albedo effect delivered in the style of Melville's Father Mapple. While Flow was designed for the stage, we recently filmed 2 scenes out on Chicago's lakefront during the deep, deep snow in February. And so I'm going to ask Matt to play a scene called A Short Sermon on the Albedo Effect.
Albedo, first attested 1859, from the Latin meaning the proportion of light reflecting from a surface, as in albino, alabaster, white light, not related to the root word for albatross, or albacore tuna, from the Arabic albakara, meaning milked cow, the whiteness of the milk being a coincidence. Albedo, as in light, as in sunlight, as in the sun's intensity, as in how much light gets in, as in more light, as in hothouse tomatoes and hothouse flood, and just plain hothouses, as in greenhouse grown hurricane, as in climactic climax, as in warming, sinners, warming of the earth.
Thank you. And you can go on to the next slide, Matt. So we did some filming on Chicago's lakefront, and we did not ever get to travel to the Beaufort Sea Lagoon like I had hoped to do, but we also took a research trip to Houston to gather oral histories from people who had been directly affected by Hurricane Harvey. We spoke with both survivors and civilian rescuers, and as well an environmental lawyer about Houston's infrastructure and preparedness, or lack thereof, where Harvey becomes the new baseline for storms. And while in Houston, we performed a work in progress at the Rothko Chapel, and these are images of that performance. We were able to listen to audience members speak about their memories and experiences. From these conversations, I was struck by one shared truth that seemed to emerge, that the body itself is the center of gravity in this human-made crisis. In these disastrous weather events exacerbated by climate change, the experience is located essentially and acutely at the level of body. Survivors would vividly recall the physical exertion and trauma, such as paddling for hours to make rescues, pulling down flood-damaged drywall, and over a year later, still being triggered by the sound of rain. The man here with the microphone is Paul Middendorf, who is an artist, a gallery owner, and became and still is a civilian rescuer. And he contributed not only his story, but his photographs. And this video that you're going to see next was then projected onto the set design. And Matt, could you show the video?
The storm hit Saturday night and continued on until I think Tuesday morning is how long it was raining. And added a new color to Doppler radar because it was like 55 inches of rain in 24 hours. It was something unheard of. And because of all the system infrastructure was totally out. 911 was down. The fire department only had 2 boats for the whole city. The trucks couldn't get anywhere. The police department, everyone was totally inundated, and so they were asking the community for help. Sometimes you'd get to a neighborhood and it was you're the first one there, and there's hundreds of people to rescue, and you're calling in on the radio to try to get anyone that's nearby to get there.
Do you want me to go home or do you want me to stay out and help? And he just looked at me and said, anybody you can pick up, because we can't handle all the calls.
Thank you. And you can go to the next slide, please. So here we are. This is the stage version of Flow. You can see in the background the inflatable, they're large 12-foot tall inflatables that Bob Faust created to sort of convey icebergs, and they were moved throughout the performance by the dancers. The lighting design was intended to express sort of the fracturing sea ice. Next slide. This image shows, again, on the projection, you can see some small bubbles, which each one was a different icon representing a different source of CO2. So this section internally, we called it accumulation, and it's about the seemingly unstoppable increase of carbon in the atmosphere. The animation the sound, the dancing, all pushed to density and speed to convey this. Next slide. This is another projection of the ice photographs on the inflatables. Next slide. Interconnectivity became a physical motif suggesting rescue, linking, and the interwoven human and natural ecosystems. I'm going to show a third and final video. As I mentioned earlier, science denial and conspiracy thinking was addressed, and this scene is called "The Earth Is Not."
The Earth is not warming. It's cooling. If anything, it's staying the same. It's a conspiracy. Climate, whatever. I believe the human potential is infinite. The price of oil is manipulated to keep us docile. There's no so-called limit. If anything, it's cooling in certain places. The Earth is not.
Thank you. And just let's just buzz through the final slides. And next slide, please. So we also included a community cast in the premiere at UW-Madison, and the community members each got to create their own short pop-up performances, their own response to climate change. This was a beautiful, disturbing duet about eating meat. And then next slide, let's go forward to Lynn. Lynn created a very beautiful meditation on glacial melt. And I'll just close there because I see that I am over time, and I'd love to take any questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really fantastic. And I really love the the focus on ice and albedo and all of that, because I think that as a scientist who has to teach these things, it's often really kind of hard to kind of capture the essence of why it's so, you know, problematic, troubling, like, and people don't often live in glaciers, and so it can be kind of complicated. And so I really love the way that you've kind of captured that with your work. Yeah, maybe we have if any of the other panelists have comments or thoughts, or we can also save it to the discussion that we're going to have after. Just a bookkeeping note, Allison mentioned this at the beginning, but we are going to run over the hour, probably closer to an hour and a half. I hope that you all can stay with us because it's been really amazing and fascinating so far. Do any of the panelists or have questions or comments for Carrie, or should we move on to Laura? Okay, let's move on to Laura so we can kind of stay within the time limits here and have a more robust discussion at the end. So I'd like to introduce our final panelist, Laura Lupton.
Lupton, yeah. Hi, I am Laura Lupton. I am a co-founder of Galleries Commit and now also Artists Commit. I'm a gallery worker that's based in New York City and a creative projects advisor kind of more broadly. Thank you also to the Art Institute of Chicago for having us, and also specifically to Jenny, who has been a part of the Artists Commit organizing team as part of why we're here today. I'll be talking a bit about Artists Commit, which just launched, and kind of how it came to be out of Galleries Commit and what our current objectives are. It's a slightly different presentation from some of the artist things that we just watched, and it's maybe coming at the climate crisis and artist activism from a different direction. So Artists Commit is an artist-led collective committed to a climate-conscious, resilient, and equitable future. This initiative emerged out of a group of artists who had originally signed on to an open letter that was titled "Committing to a Climate-Conscious Future for New York City Galleries." That letter was written by New York City gallery workers and was published by Galleries Commit. So Galleries Commit is a worker-led collective that emerged in 2020 out of conversations that had been happening between gallery workers who had a shared concern around the climate crisis, and also a shared interest in whether it was possible or what it looked like to co-create an art world that we wanted to be a part of in the future while operating within our current roles in our spaces. So while Galleries Commit was always focused on providing gallery workers with tools, from the beginning, a core part of the initiative was having artists sign on to that letter as allies as well. And the artists who signed wanted to also be able to take their own direct action. So these two initiatives were really founded with a common source, common goals, and common communities. And so in many ways, it's been an experiment in coalition building through a collective strategy of targeting the same end goal through two channels of a community that can be allies with each other and taking action. So with that history in mind, and while the community that it's emerged from and that it's really directly targeting is definitely New York City galleries and the artists who work with them. So I'll refer to galleries and artists throughout my presentation. The tools, the actions that we're creating are really applicable outside of that to artists who don't work with New York City galleries, but are interested in taking climate action with their exhibitions, whether it's at museums, institutions, or even just within their own studio practices. So Artists Commit is centered on the statement that artists recognize that we face a climate emergency that intersects with racial, economic, labor, and other forms of structural injustice that requires immediate and collective action. When you sign on to the Committing to a Climate Conscious Future for New York City Galleries letter, you commit yourself to doing three things. That's evaluating your impact, speaking up, and making yourself known. Those things are really focused on self-reflection, holding yourself accountable to at least speaking up for alternatives, even if the space where you're working isn't going to immediately enact those, and making yourself publicly listed so that we can find each other as allies. Making that commitment, then artists were asking, what can we do? So Artists Commit is really drawing on the power of artists to catalyze climate action within their galleries by voicing their support as allies in existing action that the gallery might be taking, or by using their exhibitions and collaborations with their gallery spaces as vehicles to introduce climate practice and experimentation into that space. So the first very simple but effective action is artists can talk to their gallery, ask them if they have started taking climate action, make sure that the gallery knows that you as an artist want to support them in adopting climate conscious practices. You can also use the public list of signatures of these letters to find and connect with other artists at the gallery or gallery workers that you're familiar with, so you can talk to them about how to support this action together. So the idea here is really that these things can build off of each other and support each other. So artists can check to see if gallery workers or other artists they know have signed the commitment, and then you can reach out to them and let them know, hey, you also support taking climate action, and suddenly you have a coalition working together towards shared goals. We also, there's also, of course, some galleries that haven't signed on or aren't quite ready to develop a comprehensive climate action plan. And there are some artists who want to be able to take control of the way their work is exhibited, regardless if they have a pre-existing relationship with the gallery. So we also created the Artists Commit Climate Rider as a framework to help direct artists in navigating exhibition making. This actually adopts the same 4 core principles that's in our worker-created climate action plan for galleries, but it adopts them to an exhibition level so that when artists have more direct involvement. So cutting emissions, eliminating waste, supporting staff, and taking collective action are those 4 core principles. Cutting emissions and eliminating waste, there's some really great resources on our website and tools to help support that. But 2 things that I want to maybe talk a little bit more about now are supporting staff and taking collective action. So as a worker-led initiative, and especially one that emerged last summer during 2020 simultaneously as a protest in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and a national reckoning with a long history of racism in our country happening throughout America, it's been central to our mission from the beginning that committing to climate means a commitment to new models that embrace overall equity and anti-racism, that these 2 things are linked in both their root causes and their direct effects. And 2, that to truly take climate action requires evaluating the assumed paradigms hierarchies and practices that inform the way we've structured our workplaces, studios, and projects. So we really advocate that just as central to a climate action plan as cutting emissions and eliminating waste is making sure that you are paying fair, transparent wages, that you're prioritizing hiring queer, trans, BIPOC, and cooperatively owned local businesses and individuals who support climate action, that you're actively creating spaces that are free of racism, harassment, and other forms of inequity. And only then can you truly foster an environment that supports climate-minded thinking and conversation with the team in a sustainable way. We also really prioritize framing action as collective action over individual leadership, and emphasizing transparency about what we do, both our successes and our challenges, thinking that if we can foster a culture where it's okay to fail in public, and frame that failure or those challenges as part of our sector's collective growth and learning, that's how we can actually facilitate the most rapid change. So the approach of Artists Commit really actually came out of what we saw was really effective and already happening within the Galleries Commit community. So it had been undeniable from the beginning that certain gallery owners and workers were motivated to sign their names publicly only after their artist had signed or shared this letter with them. There were also several examples that have been coming out over the past several months of artist and gallery collaborations that have been able to usher in climate practices to the gallery and the artist practice that have in some cases become permanent. So Mika Tosca at James Cohen earlier this year for his exhibition was able to work with the gallery to do an understanding of what the carbon emissions related to the exhibition were. They were also able to protect stored carbon through a large-scale land conservation partnership that Galleries Commit has with Art to Acres. Similarly, Harold Onkart, the next slide, Harold Onkart at David's Warner Gallery last year, they actually did a much more comprehensive carbon audit using the vehicle of Harold's exhibition to look also at some of the staff practices, which have really shaped direction that the gallery has been taking over the course of the past several months. And next slide. Allison Janae Hamilton actually has an exhibition that's closing tomorrow in New York City, if anyone is in town, at Marion Boesky Gallery. And they were able to work really closely together to track the carbon output and make material choices consciously with a climate agenda in mind throughout the planning and execution of both the individual artworks in the show and the exhibition as a whole. For all of these, it was either the artist who specifically asked for their exhibition to address climate practices, or the gallery was able to approach that specific artist about being kind of a case study for climate practice because they knew that the artist would be supportive and invested. So when we know that we have allies that are invested in co-creating change, it really opens up a space for experimentation, for role modeling and shifting paradigms. This rider and Artists Commit as a whole have always been designed to be kind of an invitation to collaborate on climate action. It provides 4 core action areas as a starting place, and it does aim to be instructive because it wants to be a tool that's helpful, but it also aims to be flexible. So it's always intended to support experimentation, to foster shared knowledge, and to create transparency, again, about both our successes and challenges, with the goal of enacting rapid and meaningful collective change. We're also, as an organizing group, learning as we go, and that at times means that we are also role modeling learning in public. And I will also say that the rider and the initiative emerged with an awareness of our complex histories, often complicit histories, a knowledge that crises like this do not affect all people equally, and an understanding that privilege affects the ability to act. It acknowledges that the actions available often seem quite inadequate, and yet we have to resolve to act anyways. So taking climate action at galleries or at museums or institutions is in no way an artist's responsibility alone, but through initiatives like Artists Commit, then if we can start that conversation happening, then it means we can open up doors of what's possible when 2 people who care about something turn to each other and say, hey, you care about this? I care about this too. What might we be able to do together if we talk about that? And I just heard my alarm go off, which is my 10 minutes, so I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. That was really amazing. And I think what you said about, there was something that you just said maybe 5 minutes ago that resonated about how individual actions might not actually solve the climate crisis on their own, but can foster this, you know, momentum, inertia that I think can carry us through to the finish line, can help us, you know, to tie this all together, can help us imagine a future that's the right one. So thank you so much to Laura and Jenny and Carrie and Gabriella for those incredible presentations. I know we've run over time, but I'd love to spend maybe 10 minutes or so having a brief discussion. So if you are watching and you're still with us and you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the chat and I will try and get to it. I'd like to start with a question from Terry Power. They write that let's see, I'll just read it. What I see happening with artist activists is that in some cases, artists through their empathy are drawn to action and not necessarily action through visual creations. So I see this as a conflict. Could anyone address how you stay focused as an artist and not as an activist only? I'd also like to amend this question by saying that artists don't necessarily just create visual things, they also create audio, sonic and performative and other things as well. But if any of the panelists would like to address that, please jump in.
Yeah, sure, I'll jump in. I think that that's a great question. I think that, you know, in some ways this speaks to what all of us are dealing with no matter what field we see our work being in, right? It's like, how are you also a lawyer and an activist? How are you a physician and an activist, or a scientist and an activist? And, you know, what does it mean to be an activist in this day when there are just, you know, so many precipices under our feet? But I guess I don't personally feel this as a conflict. I think that the two fields are really, you know, that to me, and I can only speak for myself, I'm interested in art that engages with the world, that speaks to the world, that creates change in the world. And so I see this as like a generative practice where each aspect is feeding back one into the other. I think, you know, you'll notice that the slides that I shared, I probably did about half and half projects that are activist and half that are more gallery-based work. But, you know, my work is actually like predominantly either visual work or sound pieces that does actually like, it mostly stays in this art camp and then has tentacles that go in all different other directions. And even with the work that I was doing, say with Extinction Rebellion or with the activists around the MVP pipeline, it's really driven by visuality. I think that, you know, I wouldn't know how to do what I do in those spaces if I wasn't, you know, trained and educated as an artist. So, but thank you. I think that it's just a tension that we have to hold. And you know, it's like, it's almost like you walk, to me, the best work does both. And I think it's very hard to walk that knife's edge, you know, but like Laura is saying, like we understand our work may not be, as individuals, may not be adequate to the task of confronting the climate crisis, but we have to act regardless. And so, yeah, I would just keep trying to do this difficult work, but joyfully.
Yeah, I'll also respond briefly to that because I think that's something that's interesting with the Artists Commit initiative, that it doesn't really, to use the Artists Commit Climate Rider to approach an exhibition, it doesn't require the content of that artwork to have any even like acknowledgement of the climate crisis. It's really about, as you're making that work, how are you reducing emissions, eliminating waste within your studio practice, thinking about the life cycle of that work or the project, where it's going after. Does it require carbon intensive shipping? Is it drawing high electricity use things? So that's not actually, it doesn't really have to impact or influence or dictate what work you're making. But no matter what work you're making, you can do it in a way that you're evaluating your practices and making sure that those things are climate conscious.
Right, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, I talk about this a lot with my students. I teach an art and the climate crisis class to high school kids. And, you know, this conversation of how you can make something visually that may not even be about the climate crisis, but is still somehow considering the important factors of the life cycle of materials, or of how you are engaging an audience, and whether or not that is bringing more people into a conversation that's adjacent to that, because we now know that, you know, so many of these issues are clearly not siloed issues, but the fight for, social justice and racial justice and climate justice are all intertwined, right? And so, my students who are interested in things that are very diverse, looking at just what art that's interested in climate can do and how maybe artists who are interested in the climate make their work, whether or not it's explicit about the climate, because not all of my work is, for example, how those models can also be applied to other aspects of their lives, the way we all sort of move through the world, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something there, and that is, I think it's really about collaboration across these different fields. Like for myself and for the Seldons, to be able to be working not only with scientists, but also perhaps at a performance to get some people in the audience who are working to get people registered to vote. These kinds of intersections and collaboration feels like that does part of the work of activism for me that I may not be doing within the performance work itself.
That's a great point. I also think that to me, a non-artist, activism and art both have unclear definitions to me, like what defines something as activism and what defines something as art. And so I think there's absolutely sort of a space to do both. I had a panel in the fall or in the spring about how techno music can be a part of the solution to the climate crisis, and it doesn't always have to be this didactic sort of thing. So yeah, thank you all. I guess there's one more question here which I'd like to ask from Suzanne Rose. And they ask, how can we share visual art with a climate crisis narrative without sounding preachy, but also valid? And I'm curious your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think that's also a great question, and certainly one where I hope we're doing the work to explore that. I would say that for me, one thing that we can always do is speak from our own experience, right? So if we share not how we think you as the viewer or the audience should feel about something, but how it makes us feel. I thought, honestly, as I was listening to Gabriela talk about her 6-month-old daughter and trying to make work, I have a 2-year-old, and I was like almost moved to tears thinking about that. And I think that that's a really, it's a beautiful example of how, through being willing to share our own fears and our own vulnerability, we can then become conduits for a larger conversation. I think also, what Mika does, that, we're talking about science and how to be science interpreters or scientific collaborators. I also think that that's a really important role where we can, again, try to take something that might on surface level seem didactic or like we're beating you over the head with these facts, some of which are very difficult to metabolize, and try to find a way to approach that emotionally, that art can get under people's skin in a way that maybe a white paper doesn't, as deeply important as those white papers are. So, I think, I also think that something that a lot of people in this group are doing, which, just to go back, is working collaboratively, right? And so to say that we don't hold positions of authority. We're not interested in a hierarchical way of presenting knowledge, but we're interested in working collaboratively, communally. A lot of people here, are working in these kind of anti-monumental forms, work that is biodegradable, work that is ephemeral in these other ways. And I think that these are actually ways that we can use the language of art, so this kind of the visuality, to speak about things in ways that it doesn't come off as didactic or oppressive. It's these forms that are emotional and gentle to talk about oftentimes these very difficult subject matter.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to that question by first admitting that I have sometimes gotten into trouble where I've been so interested in the research and then it has sat right on top of the dance and felt kind of didactic, right? And so I think that was a problem really of one, not trusting the dancing body to really deliver the information, and how some of these situations can affect like the human spine, like what do postures and gestures of deprivation or isolation, what does that look like on the human form? And so sometimes I just need for the dancers to stop talking. That's one thing, but I think that more importantly, even it's like an integration of all of it. It's an integration of the research, integration of all of these different artistic components that we're using to tell the story, whether it's visual, sonic, verbal, movement.
I'll just add that I think that it's important as creative people, as cultural producers, that we're just also bringing people into the conversation, whether or not the work, is saying a fact or sharing something that is scientific. But by even just having more people kind of knowing that we care and that we're talking about it, helps others understand that they're not by themselves in this, and that we have a critical mass. This is what we need to do and what we want to do, I think. So I think that's also like to make something that's not preachy. I think you really just have to be coming from yourself, but leaving it open for others to bring their own selves to that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you, so much. Laura, do you have anything to add to that question, or I don't want to leave you out, sorry.
I will echo what everyone else has said and just think that if you're truly being self-reflective and like acknowledging your own journey of exploring these questions and exploring what it looks like, I think that translates to an empathetic view. If you're empathetic with yourself, then you end up being empathetic with other spaces. And so I think that's a critical part of all of this, is reflecting on like our own journey from this and translating that to a more public view. And if you have that empathy, I think it comes across in the way you communicate it as well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you all so much. I've done a lot of panels like this over the past year, and I have to say that this was honestly the best one that I've done. I think that the art was really, really engaging, and the commentary and everything, and I want to have you all come talk to my classes. So we'll be in touch. But yeah, so thank you all so much for that, and it was really like an amazing afternoon, and I'd like to just hand it back to Allison to close us out.
Thanks, Mika. Thank you so much for kind of guiding us through that conversation. And Gabriella, Laura, Carrie, Jenny, thank you so much. What kept coming to mind throughout all of your presentations were just these ideas of collaboration and empathy. But as you so beautifully demonstrated today, that invitation to invite people into the conversation with you. So thank you for doing that. And thank you to everybody who joined us. We do have this recording, which, as I mentioned, we will post. We also saw some comments about requests for the chat, so we'll try to figure that out. But hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day and weeks ahead, and we just appreciate being with you. Thank you.